Okay, we've now configured authentication, login, register in our app, and we're just about done with this section. But before we move on, I just want to take a look at a bit of housekeeping inside our program.cs class. We do add a number of services to our application, and we've barely started, and already it's looking quite busy inside here. So just a bit of housekeeping we can do. We can move some of this code elsewhere and clean up what's going on inside this particular class, which can get very busy. We just have a single program class. So I like to do a bit of housekeeping with this and separate some of the code into another area. And one of the ways that we can separate that code is by using an extension method. Now we're going to extend the services, and the services is a type of iService collection, a collection of services for the application to compose. And we can add extension methods to our iService collection. What we're already using are extension methods. If I hover over this, we can see that add cause is an extension. The add scoped. If I hover over this, this is also an extension. And so is everything else inside here. But we can create our own extension methods, and that's going to allow us to create our own one of these, but it's going to return all of the services that we want and allow us to move them outside of this program class. So inside the API folder, I'm just going to create a new folder and call it extensions. We'll be creating several of these whilst building this application. And I'm going to create inside the extensions, I'm going to say add new file and create a class, and I'm going to call it application service extensions and press return. And extension methods are static. So we specify static before the class. And when we say static, a static keyword allows us to use the methods inside this class without needing to create a new instance of this class. And we can create a static method inside here. So I'm going to say public, and it's going to be a static method inside a static class. And what we're going to return from this is an iService collection. And we're going to give this method a name of add application services. And when we're using an extension method, we want to use this on the services collection. So the goal of this is to say builder.services, then add application services to extend the iService collection. And in order to do that, we say what it is we're extending using the this keyword. So I'm going to say this iService collection and call it services. Now, some of our services require configuration, such as use SQLite. This needs our configuration, so we're also going to add that as a parameter as well to this method. And we're going to say iConfiguration config. And let's add this, or add the curly brackets, and let's just drop this down so I don't go off the end of the screen. So this is what we're extending. And when we're extending something, then we can use this method, and we make it static so we don't need to instantiate a new instance of this class when we're using the methods inside it. And we're going to return from this an iService collection. So let's go back to our program class, and we're going to cut everything apart from the authentication stuff into the clipboard. So add controllers, add DB context, add cause, add scoped. I'm just going to cut that into my clipboard and effectively paste it inside this method. And try and reformat things. And by the way, reformatting, you can do that with a shortcut keyboard combination. In my case, it's Shift, Option, and F. But if you right-click the document you're working in, then you've also got the Format Document option, and it will tell you what the shortcut key combination is for you. So you can get that by just right-clicking anywhere in this document. And we need to change builder.services to services inside here. So I'm just going to highlight builder.services, and then in my case it's Command Shift and L. I think it's Control Shift and L in Windows. and that will allow you to select everything that matches what you selected. And I can just delete that and say services, and then we've got the add controllers. We'll need to add the using statements for anything else inside here, so use the quick fix on the data context and say using API data, use the quick fix on use SQLite and say using Microsoft Entity Framework Core, and then we've added config as a parameter inside here. So instead of builder.configuration, it's just config.connectionString. And we're getting an error here because we're telling this method that we're returning an iService collection. So below the services, I need to return the services. And then to use this new method, we go back to our program class and we say builder.services, and then we can say add application services, and we pass in the builder.configuration as the parameter. Now inside the application service extensions, it says I've got two parameters here, but because we're extending the services, we don't add this as a separate parameter when we use it. Because if we hover over this method, because it's an extension method, then we only need to pass in the configuration, because we're already extending this thing when we use this extension method. So we'll do something similar for the authentication as well. We'll keep this separate from our other services because this genuinely does get quite busy. And we'll go back to our extensions folder, and I'm just going to add a new file that is a class and say identity service extensions. And we're going to do pretty much the same thing we just did with the application services. We're going to make this a static class. And inside static classes, we're going to create a static method. So I'm going to say public static iService collection. Once again, we're returning that. And I'm going to say add identity services. And I'm going to say this iService collection and call it services. And we also need our iConfiguration config inside here as well. And let's just move this down. And then I'll go back to the program class. I'm just going to cut the builder.services add authentication and paste that inside here and reformat things. I'll change builder.services to services. We'll import the JWT bearer defaults or add the using statement for it. The builder.configuration will swap for config. And the rest of this, we just need to add the appropriate using statements where necessary. And then below the services, we'll just return services. And then we can go back to our program class and we can say builder.services and add identity services and pass in builder.configuration. And once again, I probably forgot to change the namespace inside here. So this is namespace of just API, and typically this should say API extensions if I was using any other tool apart from the C# dev kit. It's the only C# utility I've ever used that doesn't automatically populate the namespace to what the folder is that we're using. And like I say, it doesn't matter if you do forget, but when I do remember, I'll just come in and update it. What this does do is break the functionality in our program class because now we need the using statement for these services. So we can use the quick fix and just say using API extensions. And we've got a bunch of using statements we no longer need in this class. So we can put our cursor inside here and just say remove unnecessary usings. And now we've got a much cleaner program class. But did we break anything? Well, let's take a look. And we'll go back to our terminal. And once again, hot reloading, surprise, surprise, didn't like that code change either. So we're going to restart the app once again and just run a few tests in Postman to make sure things still work as we expect them to. So once the app has restarted, let's go back to Postman. Let's try logging in, or it says login as Bob, but Dave is the user that I've been logging in with. So I'll log in as Dave. We get the token, and let's just make sure I can use that token to go and get the individual user and I'll paste a token in there and click send. And that confirms that our middleware is working, our authentication's working, and that bit of housekeeping didn't break anything in our app. But this does bring us to the end of this section. So as per usual, when we finish any section, we're going to commit our changes into source control. So I'll just find a spare tab, and we need to go up to, in fact, no, I do not need to find a spare tab. We could just use the VS Code source control tab to do this. So these are the changes that I've made in this lesson. That looks fine. Sending up the dating DB to source control, is that a big deal? Not really. It's going to be a pretty small database anyway. And if I decide that I want to write this code on a different computer, then I've already got the database with the data that I was working with on another one if I did decide to clone this project and work on it somewhere else. So I don't mind keeping that inside source control. So I'm going to stage these changes and give it a commit message of end of section 4 and commit those changes and sync those changes with source control. That's new. I don't remember this occurring before, nor do I know why that continues to happen with VS Code. I'm presuming a VS Code quirk, by the way, here. I haven't changed anything on my GitHub repository, so there is nothing to pull. And this prompt seems to be a regular occurrence now. But if we look at the background here, we can see that sync changes is going one way. If we had changes coming from the other way, then we'd see a down arrow as well. So this warning doesn't really make any sense. I'm presuming it's just a VS Code quirk that you may or may not see. So I'm going to say OK, and I could say OK, don't show again, but I'm just going to say OK to this, and let it synchronize those changes with GitHub. And that worked just fine. So we'll wrap up this section with a summary.